On August 29, 2021, Hurricane Ida made landfall in Port Fourchon, Louisiana. 150-mile-per-hour winds and torrential rains immediately started wreaking havoc on Louisiana's coastline. The Category 4 hurricane started traveling further inwards, with New Orleans and its surrounding areas getting the worst of the storm. About 30 miles northeast of the city, in the town of Slidell, a man named Timothy Satterlee and his wife were hunkered down in their home. On August 30th, the day after Hurricane Ida made landfall in Louisiana, the storm didn't seem to be letting up. Timothy had a tool shed in his yard and wanted to check on some of its contents for storm-damaged items. However, getting there would be no easy task. Many residents in town reported floodwaters of around 6 feet high. Even with the shed being so close to their house, there's a number of dangers associated with going into that water. Alligators, venomous snakes, and other dangerous creatures can be displaced during these storms and easily end up in residential neighborhoods. There was also a fear of debris and nearby fallen power lines. Despite the dangers ahead of him, Timothy decided to wade through the murky waters and check on the shed. His wife, who saw him exit the house, heard a loud series of splashes and yelling coming from outside. After a brief moment of looking out into the hectic and stormy outdoors, she saw her husband tangled up with an alligator. The creature had its jaws tightly secured around Timothy's body and was violently thrashing. His wife would later describe the alligator as attempting to take her husband under the floodwaters in a sort of death roll. She was somehow able to intervene and drag her husband's unconscious body to their porch. Timothy was unresponsive and was missing one of his arms. In a state of shock and horror, his wife left his side and climbed into a small boat nearby in order to find some help. Upon returning home not too long later, there were no signs of Timothy or the alligator. A deputy recalled that the chaos of the hurricane and alligator attack could have led her to mistakenly leave her husband unconscious and exposed outside. Investigators started searching for the man and eventually made a breakthrough about 2 weeks later. A large alligator had been caught in a trap not too far from where Timothy Satterlee was last seen. Authorities euthanized the creature and proceeded to cut open its stomach, where they discovered what appeared to be human remains. To be specific, the upper half of someone's body is what they found. It was not easy to identify this individual's identity due to the amount of time these remains were in the alligator's stomach. As a result, much of the tissue and DNA had been severely decomposed. Experts had to relate 11 similar characteristics between the body parts and missing man's features. They even went as far as looking into his past surgeries and seeing if anything could be matched to the remains. About a week after their dedicated efforts, authorities announced that the parts inside of the creature had belonged to Timothy Satterlee. With over 2 million alligators living in Louisiana, it was almost impossible that officials could locate the exact one. By sheer luck or coincidence, it was one of the first alligators they checked following the hurricane. The reptile was apparently 504 pounds and 12 feet long when captured, which gives an idea of the sheer dinosaur that Timothy was against that day. Hurricanes and areas bring a special type of horror that is outside of any bad weather. As mentioned earlier, the rising water levels will displace a variety of wildlife. Some of these not only include alligators, but also multiple species of venomous snakes. It's especially dangerous getting bit by one of these creatures during a big storm because emergency assistance will be delayed. If it was an eastern diamondback rattlesnake that had bitten Timothy, he might not have survived that either. Antivenom might not have been available during the chaos of the storm. It is widely believed that alligators attacked people during Hurricane Katrina as well, but this seems to be a contested subject. In my opinion, I would be shocked if anyone made it out of that storm without getting bitten by something. For the second part of this video, I'm going to talk about another alligator attack, this one occurring in Florida. In July of 2022, a 43-year-old named Eric Murda was heading home from work and decided to do some exploring. He turned down a dirt road near Lake Manatee, which is a man-made reservoir in southeast Florida. A lifelong Floridian and outdoorsman, Eric loved walking through the woods and discovering new places. While somewhere near Lake Manatee Fish Camp, he got lost trying to find his way out of the dense woodlands. After a few hours, Eric was at the edge of Lake Manatee when he saw his car parked on the opposite end of the 2-square-mile reservoir. Exhausted and desperately wanting to go home, Eric made the decision to swim across the lake instead of potentially getting lost again in the woods. Once in the water, his wet clothes started to feel heavy and begin to strain his already weak body. Eric decided to shed most of his clothing and continue to swim forward. A few moments later, the 43-year-old man had a very sick and ominous feeling. He turned to his right and saw a large adult alligator staring into his eyes, only a few feet away. The horror of the situation caused Eric to start frantically swimming away. The alligator quickly reacted by biting and holding onto Eric's right arm. The creature then dragged him underwater 3 separate times in an attempt to induce drowning. Eric used his left arm to wrap himself around the alligator, attempting to use the balanced position to kick upwards towards the surface. On the final dive underwater, the alligator attempted to perform the so-called death roll, in which the reptile rolls over in a quick and explosive way. This is meant to dismember their prey, which makes it easier for them to consume. As the alligator initiated the death roll with Eric's right arm in his mouth, the creature completely tore off his entire arm. The massive reptile then swam away, with the man's arm still lodged in its mouth. Eric looked at where his arm should be and only saw bones sticking out. The shock of the situation was keeping the pain at bay for a brief time, but this ordeal was far from over. Eric turns around and decides not to swim towards his van, but instead to the spot he originally got in the water. Once on land, he noticed his injuries were miraculously not bleeding, but still very serious. Not too long after, Eric fell asleep in some grass due to pure exhaustion. When he woke up to the sun rising the next morning, Eric decided to climb a tree using his only arm, and he yelled and waved his hands at passing planes. He climbed down and decided he was going to continue walking through the woods in search for safety. The swampy conditions of the forest were difficult to get through, especially for someone in Eric's position. Flies started to gather around the exposed bone from where his arm was bitten off, and thick thorn-filled vegetation was torturing his bare feet. After 4 days of wandering in agony, Eric resorted to dragging himself through the woods. He would constantly scream out in pain from his open wound touching thorns and branches. At some point during his 4th day of being lost, Eric saw an empty beer bottle on the floor. This gave him a hope that civilization was close by. Eventually, Eric noticed a truck through the dense vegetation and began yelling at it. After not being heard, he stumbled towards the car and got the attention of the driver. Eric was fully naked, covered in cuts, and was missing an entire arm. He was quickly flown by helicopter to Sarasota Memorial Hospital and was operated on for the next 3 weeks. Doctors needed to remove more bone and cartilage in order to properly amputate the limb. 2 alligators were trapped in the following days, with one of them being over 9 feet long. Eric was eventually fitted for a prosthetic limb and maintained a positive outlook on life. It's never a good idea to swim in freshwater bodies of water in a state like Florida. With over 1.3 million alligators spread throughout the state, there's a good chance at least one of these creatures is lurking underwater. From small retention ponds to large lakes, they thrive in that environment and use it to their advantage when killing prey. Since 1948, there have been around 450 alligator attacks on humans, with 30 of those ending in fatality. Alligators can inflict a bite with over 2,000 pounds of force per square inch, and they do so with around 75 sharp teeth. I'm going to start to focus on more animal attack stories like these 2 I told you about today. Subscribe and leave a like if you enjoyed. Have a great day.